Hi everyone, and welcome to the MUNA preparation webinar. My name is Robert Cook and I'm the Youth Programs Chair for Rotary District 9820. It's really great to see so many people who have joined this webinar in preparation for the upcoming Model United Nations Assembly. We're really excited about the upcoming event and hopefully it'll be really exciting for you as well. Alf, if you can go to the next slide. So in today's webinar, we're going to talk about what you can expect in the upcoming MUNA. Then we're going to go through the resolutions that you'll be debating in MUNA. When you hear about the resolutions, just try and think about what your country is and what opinions your country might have about these topics and whether you might be for or you might be against them. And then we'll give you some tips on how to prepare for the actual day. And don't forget, you can type your questions in the Q&A box in Zoom and we'll answer those at the end. And this webinar is being recorded, so we'll make that available to you very soon after it's finished. So now I might hand over to Di Harrison. Di is the MUNA committee chair. She's the one that's been doing most of the organising for this event, and she'll tell you a little bit about what to expect on the day.
Okay, good morning and thank you, Rob, for your introduction. I'd especially like to welcome all delegations who are participating in MUNA 2022, together with the school counsellors, Rotarians and supporters of MUNA. So as Rob's outlined, the purpose of today's webinar is to support delegations with specific information about MUNA and information about the 3 resolutions to be debated. The overarching goal is for all participants to enjoy the day, but also to increase their knowledge about the United Nations and to improve their debating skills. But more importantly, you will learn to respect and tolerate difference of race, religion and nationalism. Judging will be undertaken by a panel of adjudicators who will evaluate each delegation's performance against criteria which will be made available to participants. The specific awards such as the People's Choice, Best Delegation Overall, Peace Prize and Best Country Dress are based on team effort, not individual performance. And further information about the awards will be available on our MUNA website. So to ensure the day is successful, debates in MUNA, rules of procedures and the general decorum of delegates are designed to approximate the UN General Assembly. Each delegate must be familiar with the procedures of the Assembly, which is under the control of the Secretary General, and that information will be available on our website. So the specific points to be knowledgeable about include order and length of speeches, points of order, group meetings, schedule of delegations to speak either for or against a resolution, and diplomatic notes. So I just want to share a couple of important points about diplomatic notes. They are an important facet of the MUNA process and are used to persuade delegate members who are yet to speak to add a delegation's view during a presentation. It's a really important strategic approach to the debate. The notes will be vetted, but must be in the spirit of MUNA, not frivolous in nature, and will be delivered by diplomatic couriers. So to make sure that things go smoothly in the Assembly, we have a code of conduct, and there'll be specific information about expectations of behaviour will be on our website. So please ensure you've read that information prior to attending MUNA. Basically, all participants in MUNA agree to exercise common sense and respect for others in their dealings with each other throughout the MUNA event. We also have a dress code. So in order to create the approximate atmosphere of the learning experiences that MUNA offers, participants must conform to a dress code during the meeting of the Assembly. The criteria are professionalism and modesty. And participants are encouraged to wear the national dress of the country they represent. So if you decide not to wear national dress, gentlemen should wear a jacket and a collared shirt with appropriate shoes, and ladies should wear a dress, skirt, blouse or a business pantsuit with appropriate shoes. So MUNA do's and don'ts. The MUNA United Nations Assembly is a learning simulation designed to approximate the UN General Assembly in its structure and proceedings, and it's limited by local limitations. The success of a production depends entirely on how closely the actors follow the script and act out what it says. The MUNA script is based on assumptions that delegates and councillors are not what their names and addresses suggest. They are ambassadors of the countries they represent. It's not about your school, it's about the country that you are representing. So an important element to maintain order is that permission to address the Assembly is granted by the Secretary-General. So everything goes through the Secretary-General. So when addressing the Assembly, a speaker should address only the Secretary-General and nobody else, not fellow delegates and most certainly not the audience. So delegates should open with Mr. Secretary-General, we the delegates from, and then state your country. When casting a vote in the Assembly or committee meetings, one member of the delegation stands. And lastly, if delegations have any concerns or questions, please ask your school counsellor to contact me and I'll forward questions to the relevant person. I wish you all well and hope you're well prepared to engage in MUNA 2022 in 4 weeks' time. And now I'll hand over to Alf Rayner, who will offer insights and information about the resolutions to be debated. Welcome, Alf.
Thank you very much. And welcome to everybody. I hope that you will find this session useful in getting ready for MUNA, which is one of the most exciting things I think we should be doing this year. Speaking from personal experience and from the experience of many of the other participants in past years. Today, we're going to be talking about 3 resolutions, and these are the ones that you will actually be debating on the 20th of August as representatives of various countries of the United Nations. Okay, now the resolutions are, first of all, protection of global climate for present and future generation, also sometimes referred to as global warming. And the second resolution will be on the intensification of efforts to eliminate violence against women and girls. And finally, space governance. Okay, well, just before I kick off, our job is to try and give you an understanding of what each of these resolutions is about and what you as a representative of a particular country are expected to do. Your job is to actually learn about where your country stands on these various issues. And as Dias just mentioned, of course, you are representing that country and its views, its positions on each of the topics. All right, let's kick off with resolution number 1. What is it? And what is climate change? We hear a lot about it. It's been referred to as one of the greatest challenges of our time. Essentially, it's a change in weather patterns and related changes in the oceans, the land surfaces, and the ice sheets. And what does it do? It destabilizes the Earth's temperature equilibrium. The Earth doesn't like being upset. Okay? When things get out of sync, the energy balance and the temperature of the Earth will change. And as we know, the results of that can be quite catastrophic. So these are some of the effects of climate change. And the impacts, might add, affect every country on every continent. Nobody is immune from this. Some of the direct effects are rising temperatures, rising sea levels, ocean temperatures going up, extreme weather events, and we've seen a lot of those here in Australia, and we hear about them every day, bushfires, shrinking glaciers, and thawing permafrost. Some of the indirect effects, hunger, hunger. Because food becomes scarce, water becomes scarce. There are health risks. There's the economic cost of dealing with this sort of things. There is the loss of biodiversity. The oceans become more acidic, therefore marine animals and vegetation are killed off. There's more droughts and more deserts being created. And of course, ecosystems suffer a great deal. And we've seen that in both Kakadu and the Barrier Reef, but also in the Amazon rainforest and other places. So the pretty significant things that are happening. And what's the cause? Well, the cause, so according to the scientists, it's about greenhouse gas emissions from human activities to a large extent. Of course, not entirely, but we use fossil fuels. We've been making a mess of our forests. We're engaging in agricultural practices which are damaging to the environment. And a warning has recently been issued that if greenhouse gas emissions are not reduced soon, we will have further warming and sea level rises for centuries. And we're not far off, they tell us, from a tipping point beyond which it may be impossible to really reverse the situation. Now, we hear about the greenhouse effect, but what is it? It's simply defined as the fact that we produce large volumes of gases. These gases are unable to escape from the Earth's atmosphere. Therefore, they get trapped and the temperature of the Earth actually rises quite significantly. The result of that is referred to as the greenhouse effect. So what kind of gases are we talking about? Well, the main suspects are carbon dioxide, which can be created even by respiration, but also, of course, deforestation, volcano eruptions, and burning, and methane gases, nitrous oxide, and CFCs. Now, around the world, the biggest emitters, of course, are the more developed countries, and you can see on this chart who they are. It's no great surprise. You can examine this at your leisure later on. Now, to try and do something about this, in 2015, countries came together to agree on action, and that became known as the Paris Agreement. The goal is simply, first of all, to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees, preferably 1.5 degrees. And actually, there's evidence from the various panels that actually 2 degrees is far too high. It's not sustainable. And we really have to think about keeping the rise in temperatures to below 1.5 degrees. We want to achieve a climate neutral world by mid-century, that's about 2050. And we want to provide a framework for financial, technical, and capacity building support for countries that need it. Now, we'll see in a moment why that is. Okay, so the International Panel on Climate Change in 2018 recommended that we should have net zero emissions by 2050. So now the United Nations got together at this and actually issued a resolution for the guidance of countries. And the resolution that is the, pardon me, the subject of today's discussion is this. First of all, the General Assembly is reminding people about countries about the obligation for temperatures to stay below 2 degrees. And as we've just mentioned, really that should be 1.5. Number two is recommending that countries reduce their emissions by at least by 50% by 2030 in order to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. Then, it's then going on to address the importance of countries contributing economically, socially, and environmentally to and try and reduce the impacts and costs of natural disasters. Number four, member states are being urged to double the contribution in finance to support developing countries. And further, that in all of this, there's got to be full and equal participation of women. Now, this particular paragraph here, is number 5, is one that you will see in many United Nations resolutions, because the UN and its specialized agencies recognize the importance of women and their contribution to everything we do, okay? And particularly in this area. So what is the main message? The main messages are these. First of all, halve emissions by 2030. And secondly, achieve net zero emissions by 2050. They're just those two simple things. Okay. And how are we going to do that? Well, combination of adaptation and mitigation measures. So what do we mean by adaptation? Adaptation is about measures to reduce the vulnerability to the effects of climate change. And some of the things that you should be looking for when you're examining what your country is doing are these: landscape restoration and reforestation. We've made a mess of our environment. We've cut down forests and created problems for ourselves. So maybe, we can do something about those. Habitat protection. Now, we hear almost every day about how we're losing species in both flora and fauna because we've destroyed the habitats. And one particularly vulnerable creature in Australia, of course, is a koala. But building green infrastructure. Now, what do we mean by green infrastructure? It's a term that is used to describe the network of natural spaces and corridors in a given area. These include open spaces, such as parks and gardens, allotments, woodlands, fields, hedges, lakes, ponds, playing fields, coastal habitats, as well as footpaths, cycleways, or rivers. So there's a lot we can do just in those simple areas. Number 4 is crop diversification. This is something that I know that our agricultural scientists are working very hard on to actually reduce and adopt things like, grains that are resistant to drought, that do not need so much water, that will actually put up with a certain amount of climate change, climate warming. And so the diversity in crops is going to be one of the key factors that will hopefully help us to deal with the effects of climate change. Don't forget that diversity and difference has been the key factor in human development right through the ages. So difference is good, okay? Number 5, research and development of possible catastrophes, temperature, behavior, and so on. Now, the fact is that if we want to be able to do something constructive about climate change or anything else for that matter, we've got to have the facts. We've got to know what we are dealing with. We need to better understand the causes and effects of climate change so that we can be better prepared and develop possible prevention or mitigation measures. So the more we know and understand, the better prepared we can be. So it's incumbent on every country on the planet to actually look into all of these as a way of trying to adapt to the effects of climate change. Okay, that's the adaptation measures. And there are, no doubt, there are many others. If you do your research, you'll come across all sorts of other stuff that is possible. Now, the other is the mitigation aspect. Now, what's mitigation, the actions that we can take to reduce and curb greenhouse gas emissions. So if we want to achieve, we want to keep temperature rises to 1.5 or less, these are some of the things we need to be able to do. We've got to be more energy efficient. And energy efficiency refers to the use of less energy to provide an energy service. For example, if you are using LED light bulbs, they are actually able to produce the same amount of light as the old incandescent light bulbs by using something like 75 to 80% less electricity. So that's being energy efficient is just one example. There's many others. Renewable energy. The use of renewable energy is going to be terribly, terribly important. And there's a lot of action being done in that area, such as, solar energy from the sun, geothermal energy from heat inside the earth, wind energy, biomass from plants, and hydropower from flowing water. These are just some of the areas which can produce renewable energy rather than burning fossil fuels, which is what we've done for a very long time. Now, in addition to that, electrification of industry and public transport, in other words, using electricity that's been generated through those other things we've been talking about, renewable energy, that will mean that you're not relying on traditional fuels like petrol and diesel and so on. And finally, introduce maybe a carbon tax and emissions markets. Now, what's a carbon tax? Well, a carbon tax actually sets a market-based approach to controlling pollution because it provides economic incentives for reducing emissions or, if you like, a penalty for producing emissions, which comes down to pretty much the same thing. The concept is also known as cap and trade or emissions trading scheme. So many countries have introduced some of these and they seem to be having an impact. Finally, in other areas, we expect it to work cooperatively and innovatively. Global warming and climate change affect everybody, so no one can't get do it alone. So it's important that we work together, and richer countries have got to be prepared to help poorer ones for two reasons. One, the poorer countries are affected just as badly, and without their cooperation, your efforts to reduce climate change are not, the impact of climate change are not going to be terribly successful. And also because richer countries are the ones that produce most of the gases that lead to climate change anyway. And as mentioned before, the full and equal participation of women, and this is something we should always bear in mind when we're talking about any issue of importance and anything to do with these kind of things and in everyday life, of course, but women are in a position to participate. In fact, women worldwide are probably more greatly impacted by climate change because they're in more vulnerable situations or in occupations that are vulnerable to climate change. So when you're researching your country, it's important that you actually keep this in mind and see what it is that they are doing to promote the participation of women. Radio. So for your preparation, these are some of the things you need to do. First of all, you got to know your country, its culture, its democratic, its institutions, its people, its demographics. Contact the embassy. Maybe that will help. In fact, some embassies are really quite helpful. some not so helpful. Secondly, establish whether your country is committed to halving emissions by 2030 and net zero target by 2050. Thirdly, look for your country's reports to COP26. And as you probably know, there was a climate summit organized by the United Nations in November last year. And and many countries actually produced reports in preparation for that. So you may be able to access that. Also have a look to see how your country has voted on UN climate change resolutions in the past. I'll give you some clues. Next, has your country taken adaptation actions? If so, what are they? If not, why? And they have good reasons, but it's important that you know what the situation is in order to be able to debate on behalf of that country. And similarly, with respect to mitigation policies, has your country got mitigation policies in place? And if not, why not? Now, in terms of cooperation, it's important that every country actually has agreements with other countries, and you will want to find out who they are. For example, just to give you an example, recently Australia had important meetings with Pacific countries, and they're all trying to work together. In fact, some of the Pacific countries are putting pressure on Australia to do more because they are on the receiving end of a lot of the negative impact of climate change. Now, your agreements can be local, it can be bilateral, it can be multilateral, it can be regional, it can be global. It just depends on your particular situation. And if you're a rich country, you should be in a position to make a financial contribution towards the climate change fund. So find out what your country is doing. If you're not a rich country, if you're a poor country, then it's important to establish what assistance you're going to be needing, financial or otherwise, in order to deal with the impact of climate change. Finally, check your country's record on promoting and encouraging the participation of women. Can they be improved? And we keep coming back to this. All right. Okay. So here's a number of useful websites. These slides, by the way, will be on the website soon, so you'll be able to, you don't need to try and get them down now. You'll be able to access them and you'll be able to have a look for yourself. Okay, right. I think that's all we've got time for on climate change. I'm conscious of the time, so I've got to move on. Resolution number 2 is intensification of efforts to eliminate violence against women and girls. And just by way of background, gender-based violence, the numbers are positively staggering. 736 million women have experienced physical and or sexual violence at least once in their life. Just think of those numbers. 35% of women worldwide have experienced either physical and or sexual intimate with partner violence or non-partner sexual violence. 7% of women have been sexually assaulted by someone other than a partner. 38% of murders of women are committed by an intimate partner. And 200 million women have experienced female genital mutilation. And these figures are likely to be an understatement. So now violence affects women disproportionately in the lower income countries and regions. And now, this is an interesting statistics here. At least 158 countries have passed laws on domestic violence. 141 have laws on sexual harassment in employment. But this means absolutely nothing if you don't implement or enforce the laws. And unfortunately, that is the case in many, many places. Also, we need to realize that violence is a multifaceted problem. There's lots of different issues involved, and then there's no simple or single solution, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be trying. So here is the resolution on this from the United Nations. First of all, calling on states to implement a commitment that they've made in the past and many times already to eliminate all forms of violence against women and girls. This is a topic that keeps coming up at the United Nations. There's nothing new about it. It's also urging states to condemn violence, right? And reaffirms, this is important, that they should not invoke any custom, tradition, or religious consideration to avoid their obligations. We also sometimes hear that genital mutilation of women and girls is a religious thing. It's not. It's not true. There's nothing in the Quran that justifies it, or in any other religious text. Number 3, the Assembly calls on states to take effective action, and I emphasize effective action, by enforcing legislation, taking measures to make sure that their officials get the proper training, and ensuring the promotion and protection of the human rights of all women in their sexual and reproductive health. Finally, the UN urges states to address the structural and underlying causes and risk factors so as to prevent domestic violence. And that include education, particularly in education of women and girls, promoting awareness of the need to eliminate violence, taking measures to empower women, and of course, eliminating trafficking in women and girls. Now, let me tell you just a bit about trafficking. Trafficking is one of the modern scourges. Well, it's been going on since time immemorial, but it's much more sophisticated these days. And of course, the main targets for trafficking are women and girls, particularly in poorer countries. And it's easy to, there's a great deal of deception involved. They're promised good jobs, plenty of money, they can support their family back home. In fact, it's nothing that happens. A lot of girls find themselves working in the sex industry. Now, the messages. Just to reinforce, one of the main messages in that resolution is this: stop dithering and making excuses. Don't continue with the false premises that justifies violence against women and girls. Stop using culture, religion, or tradition to justify violence. Pass appropriate laws and implement them. You can have the best laws in the world, unless you implement them, they're worth absolutely nothing. And you can look to Australia here, by the way, that in the area of female genital mutilation, Australia actually did something about it. They passed in the 90s, we passed strong laws that were implemented, and hopefully it's taking care of the problem. I think there's general agreement that were quite effective. Okay. It's important also to protect human rights, the human rights of women, and address the causes and risk factors to prevent domestic violence, and empower women and promote their economic, there should be autonomy there. Okay, and act on the trafficking of women and girls. You know, we'll just be talking about that. Right. For your preparation, study the country and its culture, in particular its attitudes to women. Look for statements by the government that help you understand where it's coming from. Research your country's record on gender violence, gender-based violence, domestic violence, trafficking, female genital mutilation, and so on. Get statistics if you can. It's going to be difficult, but in some cases, statistics will be available and preferably done by outside bodies that are, can be relied on. Identify what legislation there is in these areas in your country and how well or badly it is being implemented. Look for objective reports on the issues. Okay, and here's a number of them you can look up. You get unwomen.org, WHO, Our Watch, UNESCO, Human Rights Watch, and so on. There's a number of, and of course the Human Rights High Commission. Look to those bodies for reliable, unbiased information, because in some countries, the information that you are going to get is not going to be particularly useful. And ask questions to your country's embassy. Okay, now we've got to pass on to resolution number 3 because time is moving on. I've got about 15 minutes left. All right, space governance. Now, this is a new topic. We haven't done it, before, and it should be quite interesting and actually engender quite a lively debate. A little bit of background. So, well, I think the space race started back in the 1950s when the Russians put Sputnik up into orbit. It was great excitement, and eventually in 1967, a treaty was adopted at the United Nations called the Treaty on Principles Governing the Activities of States in the Exploration and Use of Outer Space, including the Moon and other celestial bodies. And this provides a foundation for international space law. Now, and what is the principles that are enshrined in that treaty are these. First of all, space activities are for the benefit of everybody. Any country can exploit orbit, so there's no limit on which country can have, of course, unless you have plenty of money and the know-how, you don't stand a chance anyway. But there's no sovereignty in space. Okay, no single nation can own space, the Moon, or any other body in space. Now, weapons of mass destruction are forbidden in orbit. We can come back to that shortly. The Moon and the planets can only be used for peaceful purposes. Any astronaut from any nation is an envoy of mankind. So there's no national boundaries. Each state is responsible for its own space activities and those of its nationals. And nations are responsible for damage caused by their space objects. There's at least 27,000 of them at the moment, and must avoid contaminating space. So that was the treaty back in 1967. Since then, huge developments have taken place. Makes exploration. There's at least 1,500 space actors now from about 200 countries. Most are for profit. And so this is resulting in a bit of an issue here in terms of governance. Some people are referring to it as the Wild West. So recognizing the problem, in 2020, the General Assembly adopted a resolution to try and reduce space threats. And a UN panel in 2021 approved a resolution to create a working group to aim at preventing an arms race. So this was approved, but there were a number of votes against. There were 9 abstentions and 8 against. And here's a list of the countries that voted against. You can draw your own conclusions from this list as to why they might have voted against such a resolution. And if you're interested in finding out how your country voted, you can go onto the UN.org, but not only how it voted, but what it said. Okay. Representatives at the UN General Assemblies all have the right to speak, and when they do, those speeches are recorded, so you can have a look there. Right, so the resolution. The Assembly is actually just affirming that all states must conduct themselves ethically and according to the norms, rules, and principles of responsible behavior. Secondly, that a number of parties that want to utilize space haven't bothered to ratify or accede to the space treaties, then being urged to do that. It's expressing the desire, notice the diplomatic language here, that member states reach a common understanding on how best to reduce threats in order to maintain space as a peaceful, safe, stable, etc. environment. There's a reason for the diplomatic language, but there's also a message behind it, and encourages member states to study the existing and potential threats and security risks to space systems. And it's also to characterize actions and activities that could be considered responsible. I'm reading this out because it's interesting. Irresponsible or threatening and their potential impact on international security, and finally contribute to the further development and implementation of norms, rules, and principles of responsible behaviors, and the reduction of the risks of misunderstanding and miscalculations with respect to outer space. The two main issues here, one is there is the fear that space may be being weaponized. Secondly, that the UN really doesn't know exactly what to do anymore, and it's actually putting an onus on countries to come up with ideas about how this can be handled. And so here the message: space is for everybody. Any threats or misbehaviors in outer space potentially impact everybody. Secondly, threats and security risks are becoming obvious, just what I was saying a moment ago. And weaponization of space may already be occurring. There may be the reason why certain countries are voting against the resolution, to avoid entering into any commitment that would be go against their own particular interests and activities. Now, an arms race in outer space is a real prospect, and it could be catastrophic. The resolution is not saying exactly that, but the meaning is quite clear behind the words. Now, tens of thousands of satellites are now in orbit. More are being added virtually every day. Lots and lots of countries are actually involved. And there is a possibility that humans will begin to inhabit space before very much longer. And that's going to have, it's going to be good and bad. It's going to be a lot, it's going to be very interesting. And this is something that perhaps you should think about as delegates of particular countries, what would you do? How should we handle human migration into outer space? What new rules will be needed to safeguard international security more generally, as well as the possibility of humans living in outer space? So for your preparation, identify your country's activities and interests in outer space. Find out if your country has a space exploration or exploitation program. If so, what are its specific aims? I mean, you don't spend all that money and years of research and endeavor just for nothing. And there's got to be something in it for you. So find out what it is, because that will give you clues about possible behaviors. So if private operators are involved, and they are, how does your country keep track of their activities? Now, it's important to know what these mavericks are about, what they're up to, because you as a country are responsible for the activities of your nationals in outer space. So, but if your country doesn't have a space program, and lots of countries don't, in what ways do you think you're affected by other countries' space activities? Now, if there's an arms race going on, if there is weaponization of space, then they should be aware of that. If there's loads of rubbish being left in outer space that eventually is going to come down to Earth, what impact is that likely to have? And then look to see what, you know, the request from the United Nations in that resolution. What behavioral criteria should we have for both public and private operators? The UN is looking to you, the countries, the member states, to come up with ideas in this area, because it's probably run out of, well, you know, it's done its best, but it hasn't been too successful up to now. And what new rules, that's rules, not riots, by the way, that's a typo, should be developed and applied to safeguard international security. So we're looking, as I said, you know, again, we're looking for ideas and for your contribution as member countries to a new set of rules that will safeguard international security. And finally, what rules do we need for human settlement of outer space? All right. Okay. Some useful sources. There's quite a number of them, but you know, I just listed them all. The more important ones here for you. You'll, you know, just look them up. Even just a quick scan of some of these reports actually can be quite useful and enlightening. I'm sure you will learn quite a lot from them. So now, some final tips for your preparation. Read the original resolution for a fuller understanding of what is on the issues and what you're being asked to do. Go to un.org for more detailed information, and there's an awful lot of information there. The UN's websites are full of interesting material, so go and have a look, have a browse. Now, as we stated before, seek out reports for reputable national and international research organizations, including universities. There's a lot of those, but be careful when you do your search on the internet. There's also a lot of rubbish there, lots of unreliable material. Agree with your partner on sharing your tasks for research and preparation. Now, you're working in pairs, okay? And so you should do your preparation together so that you have a common understanding of the issues that you're dealing with and how you're going to be dealing with them. And if possible, involve some of your other students. You know, I know some of them would be very happy to be involved in this kind of research with such interesting, what I consider interesting and really important topics. Don't forget, you have a teacher or counselor that actually you can go to also, and make sure you consult frequently with that person. Again, contact the embassy or the consulate for more information if you need to. And as we said before, some of them are going to give you a very positive response. Some are not going to be too interested. But above all, develop a clear understanding of where your country is coming from on all of these issues, and so that you can represent them accurately when you debate these resolutions. Okay, if you don't know your country well, you're going to be fumbling and you're going to be in trouble. But finally, every one of these resolutions require that you work together with other countries. You need alliances in every field of international endeavor. And for that, you have to decide what alliances you can form and communicate with other delegations. If you're, if you're in a particular region and you can see that there are advantages in actually getting together with delegations from that region, then by all means go and communicate with them and see if you can come up with a common understanding and maybe a common position on certain issues. Know your country's existing alliances. And here are a few examples. I mean, in Africa, there's ECOWAS, that's the economic community of West African states. SADC, that's the Southern African Development Community. EAC, the East Africa Community. In Asia, there's ASEAN. In the West Indies, there's CARICOM. In the Americas, there's a number of them. And of course, within our region, there's AUKUS, ANZUS, Five Eyes, etc. So be aware of special situations, for example, the Middle East and North Africa, because either, they are oil producing countries, they have security problems of their own, there is political instability, and there's all sorts of issues that you need to be aware of. Your time is limited, so stick to the main issues. You can make 2 or 3 points really well, and that's got to be worth more than half a dozen points that you rush and make it poorly. Okay, agree with your partner on sharing the research and the preparation tasks, and as I've already said, involve other students if possible. Okay. Now, be proactive. Excuse me. Aim to sponsor a resolution, because by doing that, first of all, as a sponsor of the resolution, you get 5 minutes instead of 3 minutes to talk about it. You set the agenda for the debate. It's a very important position to be in. So think about that. Communicate with other countries and try to respond to the points made by other countries when debating. Okay, so it's useful, but wherever possible, use facts, statistics if you can get them. Okay? But above all, have fun. It's a fun activity as well as, it's an important activity. You get a lot of knowledge, you will get a lot of interesting interactions, but above all, it's important to have fun. And now I think I better run out of time, and I better pass on to.
Thanks for that, Alf. Alf actually has a lot of experience. He previously works with the UN and other international organizations, and he worked as a peacekeeper and other things like that. So we're very lucky to have his knowledge on these resolutions that we can use. And I think one of the points Alf made at the end there was look for what your country's opinions are. It's not what your personal opinions are or what our opinions are on these resolutions. You have to look for what your country thinks about these things. And then you have to either speak for the motion or you have to speak against it. And I'm just going to ask Di now to have a quick chat about speaking for and speaking against it, because we're going to ask some countries to sponsor the resolution and then some countries to be the first speaker against it. And Di will tell us about that now.
Okay, thanks very much, Rob. The information on the screen is very clear. The process is going to be conducted through an online poll, which Rob will be setting up. We need to give you some time to consider your stance for each resolution, whether or not your country is for the resolution or against the resolution. And then the poll will ask you to state your position, and that information will come to the MUNA committee at our 11th of August meeting, and it will be discussed there. So the overriding aim is to ensure fairness, that the ability to sponsor a resolution and second a resolution and to speak first against and second against is shared amongst all the delegations as best as we can. So we'll do that at our committee meeting. Then I will contact the delegations who have been successful with those particular positions of speaking for or against the resolutions. And that will be done the day after the meeting. So you will have your information by the 12th of August. So you've got plenty of time to prepare for the debate on the 20th of August. If there's any questions about this particular part of the process, please contact me and I'll endeavour to make it as clear as what we can possibly make it. There's one thing I've picked up from Elf's presentation is how will students communicate with other delegations? And I've just had a bit of a think about that. We're not going to be publishing names of students or schools up on the web page because of privacy issues. So I'll be managing this process through school counsellors. So if school counsellors contact me about the delegations they wish to connect with, I can be the liaison between the two schools and pass on emails so we can manage the process that way. So it's very important to work out who you would like to contact as far as building up your allegiances and alliances. So just take that and use me as a conduit. I think back to you, Rob.
Yeah, thanks for that, Di. If you do have any questions, just pop them in the chat box. We will get to them. As you can see there, that the website muna9820.org.au/2022 is where all of the information will be. That's where we'll be posting the link to this recording and to the slides. And yeah, use your the teacher counsellor as your first resource when you're having issues researching. Then you can email the MUNA committee if you need to after that. Yeah, and the event will be at Nossal High School on the 20th of August. Di, are we starting at 9 a.m, is it?
I really like delegations to be there at least at 8:30, particularly if you need to neaten up your national costume or just get yourselves together and prepared. We will start at registrations at 9 a.m. and the event will start at 9:30. We will prepare you for a flag presentation and organise you. So we have a very tight day. We have an estimated time frame from 9 a.m. through till 4 p.m. with a morning tea, afternoon tea and a decent lunch break, so you can start negotiating between each other and engage in MUNA fully and enjoy the spirit of MUNA. So we've got...
And if you turn up a little bit earlier, you might be able to get that final negotiations done with other countries.
Absolutely. So it's all about strategy, everyone. So we're really looking forward to it. We haven't held a face-to-face Muna for a couple of years now. So, and I would really like to acknowledge the support received from Nossal High School in providing the facility. We will be live streaming it, so you will all be stars for the day, and it will be great. So enjoy. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks, Di. We'll stay on for another minute or so, just in case any last minute questions come through. But otherwise, thank you all for attending so much. And yeah, keep an eye on that website for more details. Thanks, everyone.